The following program is brought to you free of charge by the generous sponsorship of an anonymous donor in honor of Saints Thomas Aquinas and Teresa of Avila. Please keep this donor in your prayers.
Welcome to Restoration Radio. I am one of your co-hosts, Stephen Heiner. I'm joined today by my fellow co-host and very good friend, Nicholas Wansbutter, and today we've decided to pick a fight in public with you as our audience. Today our topic is the Olympics and what a Catholic point of view might be on this modern spectacle. And Nicholas and I were talking before the show, and we agreed that we probably have to start the discussion by talking about sport in general, the nature of it, and whether that's a healthy pastime or what that might be in our lives as its own thing, separate from the Olympics. And I guess I'd allow you to share your opinion first, Nicholas, on the role of sport in your life and your children who are growing up. What kind of role will sport have for them?
Right. Well, and it's an interesting question because I think we've talked about this before on the show, that we're all modern people to a certain degree. We're products of the modern world. It's where we've grown up. So to me, it's always a struggle, or it's always a pursuit to be followed of trying to figure out what is the proper way to approach things, and in this context, what's the proper way to approach sport, and to what degree have I been influenced in a bad direction by growing up in modern society. And in preparation for the show, I pulled out briefly Romano Amerio's masterful work, Iota Unum, a study of changes in the Catholic Church in the 20th century. And they've got a chapter on sports, chapter 10, and I just want to quote from that because it gives some discussion of traditional Catholic teaching as regards sport, and I think we need to try to internalize this and approach sport in this fashion. So if anyone has this book, I can just refer you to page 227 is where I'd be starting. And it says, in the tradition of Catholic teaching, the care of the body was considered under the heading of exercise and fitness, and it merged with medical considerations about hygiene. And then it goes on that the separation of these elements, the erection of bodily exercise into a special form of human activity, and finally its apotheosis, are all things that have happened in the last century. The way that sport is treated in modern society is unprecedented in human history. Mr. Amerio points out is it Dr. Amerio? I'm not sure. In any event, he points out... Right. He points out at the very beginning of the chapter that even the ancient Greeks dealt with sport in a different fashion than the way we do, and dealt with the Olympics in a different fashion than the way we do. And he points out, I am well aware that the cultivation of personal strength and beauty in ancient times was one of the links that bound the Greek cities together in their amphictyonies, and that such qualities are celebrated at civic festivals. But these festivals involved the whole of Greek culture, and poets, historians, and playwrights were honored at them no less than winners of races and athletic contests. There were no Pindars among modern champions. What we call sporting prowess was only one rather conspicuous element of the ancient festivals. But even in ancient Greece, sporting ability was not much valued when separated from that cultural whole of which it was a part, and the mere pursuit of sports as such was despised by philosophers and ridiculed in comedies.
Well, and to that point as well, we have to keep in mind that sport at that time, especially among the Spartans, was at least part training for war. So there was a secondary purpose there.
Right, and I think that carries through in Catholic culture as well. When you know me, I'm a medievalist. I always go back to the Middle Ages. I consider it the golden age of Catholic civilization. I look to the Middle Ages. What place did sport have at that time? Really, what comes to mind are the tournaments jousting, archery, melee. Again, that fulfilled the dual purpose of training for war as well, and the archery training for war, and hunting, I suppose, at the same time. And hunting, of course, being another sporting type event. But it was a totally different approach, and it wasn't sport being some good in itself. It was, again, under exercise and fitness with medical considerations about hygiene. So it was about having the old saying, healthy body, healthy mind. And so it's part of that. And I think that's what we need to get back to, and that's what I am trying to get towards. Fortunately, my children are still young enough, although they're starting to get to the age where I think that some involvement of sport will be beneficial to them, because it is very important to stay fit. And I know certainly as a lawyer, my job is fairly sedentary. I mean, I'm either sitting in an office reading cases and books, or I'm standing at a podium at most, maybe wandering slightly from the podium for dramatic effect. So sports have a certain value, it could be argued, in our society that maybe they didn't have before, and since previously almost everyone did jobs that involved some sort of physical or manual labor. So there is that benefit, but again, it's a totally different reason to appreciate it. It's to stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean, you could say if St. Thomas had the gym back then, he wouldn't have gotten so big, maybe, because he had a fairly sedentary job also.
Right. But I am, just to your question about with children, I am cognizant of the way that sport is used and I would say abused in modern society. And as much as I love hockey and consider it the king of sports,
of course, a Canadian would say that.
My children, right. I'm a bit hesitant about it because Canadians are so crazy about it. It's so competitive, even to the lowest levels of children, and there's such expectations. Even just, you're expected to be at every single practice, you're expected to be at every single game, or you're some great traitor to your team. And
but can't you bring some moderation to Marcel and tell him, don't worry about what everyone else says? This is just a game.
Well, that can be done to a certain degree. As I said, I'm hesitant. I'm not saying that I've forbid the idea or that it's not going to happen, but I am inclined a bit towards some perhaps less popular sports where things are a bit more casual.
So let me get to that point. Why did you play sports as a child?
Oh yes, I played.
So when you look back at that, was that generally a positive experience for you? When you look back and say, I'm glad I played sport, it made my schooling experience better, it made my life better?
Yes, there was definitely a positive aspect to it, and I should just say I did play quite a bit of sport growing up. I played football, Canadian football, man's football with 3 downs instead of outrageous 4 downs, and a man-sized field and ball rather than...
In the spirit of the Olympics, Nicholas is getting very patriotic here. Getting all sort of Canadian on it.
Right. So I played football from about grade 4 up until grade 12, and I was the captain of my high school football team, and I played on the Manitoba provincial football team. Not tooting my own horn, but I just want to point that out also so that no one thinks, Wansbutter's just, the bitter nerd geek that got beaten up by the jocks all the time at school, and that's why he's so against the Olympics. I did get into hockey at a later age. I didn't like it when I was younger, and I can't remember that far back as to why I didn't like it, but my parents said I hated it, and I begged them not to make me play, so I didn't take that up until I was in grade 10. So definitely good experiences.
Because I did too. I played sports every season. I played water polo and soccer and track and cross country, and I only associate generally good things. And I think we talk about manliness, some of the hazing and difficult things that go on. I appreciated that. I mean, of course, nobody looks forward to getting hazed, but I think that sort of positive when we remove that there's other contexts for this. We've talked about scouting before, and that's probably something for another show. But if there's not context for positive male interaction to reinforce general notion of manliness, I think sport does fill that need. You have this sense of competitiveness. What does it take to work together as a team? Sometimes you're going to have to work with people you don't like, but they perform well, and you work around that. How do you deal with the disappointment of losing? How do you train? How do you push your body farther? In that Olympic motto of seats to use, all to use, for to use, stronger, higher, faster. I think that's good insofar as you're challenging yourself at an age when you're younger, when you can challenge your body. I think that those are all positive things. I think you're right. In America, believe me, we have the same sort of reinforcements about soccer and some other sports here where it's really, especially football, especially in Texas, you could say. But the thing is, you always have the choice as the parent to mitigate those messages. And if your child is sensible, which I imagine there's a lot of grounding in reality at the Wansbutter house, that they're not going to get sucked into the vortex of hockey is my life. Now, this, of course, is the exception that if they're very good at hockey, and maybe they could make a life out of hockey, and I think that's a good segue into our next point, because the Olympics is at least pretending to be a showcase for, could we say, the professional amateur, or the sort of person who allegedly makes a living or is so good at doing something that they don't do anything else. And the Olympics provides a showcase for that. So obviously, if one of your children was very, very good at a sport, would you encourage them to be a professional in that sport?
I doubt it. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, if they were an absolute prodigy, then obviously God's given them some very unique gifts. But, I mean, I've known a number of people that were extremely gifted, and they still didn't have what it took to get to the level of professional sports. And the reason I'm balking at the suggestion is because the absolute total and utter dedication required to get to that level is, I don't see how that can be consistent with the Catholic lifestyle. Because
when you say Catholic lifestyle, are you talking in terms of the balance, everything in moderation, or that you can't dedicate yourself to sport as a Catholic principle?
No, I think it's the balance. You cannot live a balanced life and be to the level of an Olympian. At least from people I've known that I've known at least one individual I know who competed in the Sydney Olympics, and I know what his life was like. And it's
when you classify him as secular monk,
like your diet has to be according to your diet is completely dictated by your nutritional requirements to be at that level. You're in the gym or on the track or whatever all the time. I mean, as we were discussing before the show started, you'll never be fasting or abstaining, because if you do, you're going to lose that slight edge. I mean, what separates...
Right, but we've talked about that before, that some professions, if you're a surgeon, for example, you don't necessarily have to fast. The church has always seen there's sort of a common sense behind when you fast and abstain.
Right,
but the life you're describing sounds to me, I would characterize as a secular monk, because monks don't get a choice about what they eat. They don't get a choice about their work. They're doing the same thing all the time, and it's long days.
Yeah. And
so
I
they're
think
just working
you nailed it right there. A secular monk, but a secular monk devoted to what? Not devoted to God, but
I'm
devoted
saying
to
could there not be a Catholic expression? Could there not be a Catholic expression of this? Could we not have someone who is dedicating their body to the sport, but also, prays at the appropriate time? As Catholic lay people, we're not required to pray the office or say a mass every day. If this person said their morning prayers and night prayers, that's not onerous to do. They could probably even knock out the Angelus in between what they're doing for workouts. And not every sport has the same sort of dedication that you're going to see in track and field or swimming, as we talked about with archery or shooting. That's going to be a different level of or fencing is a different level of dedication than there is on a very physical sport.
I would argue that there's a distinction to be made between professional sports and any other profession. Sports are completely frivolous. They're not doing anything for society. The surgeon, who doesn't necessarily have to fast, well, we need surgeons. He's going to save someone's life by doing that surgery, and that's a totally different circumstance where he's not fasting so that his mind is sharp, so when he cuts open the person's brain to do some brain surgery, that he's sharp and he's going to do it right, and it's not going to be endangering this person's life.
I don't disagree with you, Nicholas, but is that not a fairly utilitarian argument? If we say that we don't need sport, well, we don't need poetry. We don't need music.
Oh, but we do need poetry.
Well,
we do need poetry.
But that's what I'm saying is, by what measure do we say we need poetry, but we don't need sport? Insofar as there is an additional engagement in society and a fulfillment that some people find that helps them apart from their regular daily life. So they've got their work, they've got their family, they've got their commitments, and sport is a healthy diversion for them. And it's certainly not the gladiatorial game.
Right. I'm going to have to, well, I don't know that it's not the gladiatorial games necessarily. Just because there isn't blood being spilled and people dying doesn't mean that it's not gladiatorial. And again, that goes to me, the absolute and total sacrifice of people's lives and relationships that they need to undergo in order to be at that Olympic level is a certain gladiatorial way. But I need to backpedal a little bit on my comment about we need poets. I may have been a bit hasty in saying that, because as I'm saying that, I'm recalling that in the Middle Ages, professional, well, I don't know about the troubadours, but actors were considered just slightly above prostitutes. In terms of
Again, Nicholas, I don't disagree with you about. I'm worried that we're parsing it in a bit too much of a utilitarian mindset. And again, agreed that the Middle Ages are I wholeheartedly agree with you that the Middle Ages are a standard that we can look back to and engage with and say that's something that we should look to. However, as you have acknowledged, you have a job, and there are other jobs that exist now that didn't exist in the Middle Ages. So people can't look back and get context and say, well, what was my job like in the Middle Ages? Well, because their job didn't exist. Right? My job, what I've done for many years, although we could argue tutors did exist, but specialized tutoring did not exist. So I can't look back and say necessarily this is the way that my life would have. Like merchants, for example, we're seen in low regard. And in some way, as a business owner, I'm a merchant of sorts. But back to the idea of need, surely we only need food, clothing, and shelter. And to a certain extent, everything else is frivolity. It's just that poetry or art or music may be less frivolous than sport. But I would classify sport as a legitimate diversion in the wide universe of what Catholics can avail themselves of when they're not praying or working or eating or sleeping.
Oh, it's absolutely a legitimate diversion. But again, that comes back to the whole thing of it's a diversion. It's not what it's elevated to in modern society. And I suppose that's the difficulty I have with it all. I've called it on my blog Durandal, and I'll say it again here. I mean, the Olympics to me is, it's like the ritual, public, ceremonial worship of man and sport.
And hold that thought, Nicholas. We've got a caller, and we're getting close to the halfway mark, so we'll let people know. You can, Nicholas, if you want to chat with that gentleman, I'll give out our telephone number. It's 949-272-9417. If you'd like to call in and share your views or argue with us or disagree or agree. A faster, less confrontational way, or maybe more confrontational way, would be on Twitter, at True Restoration. You can submit a question there. Again, or call in 949-272-9417. And I think Nicholas makes a good point when he's saying that the Olympics are how would we say, I forgot his phrase exactly, but talking about a apotheosis, a worship of man in sport, I don't disagree with that characterization. I do think that the Olympics can be overblown, and as we can look at it quite cynically with the commercial sponsors and the way everything is marketed. We're getting a blast of Olympic ads, and of course the irony of getting Olympic ads from McDonald's, something that Olympians probably have never eaten, or haven't eaten for years, that McDonald's would advertise for Olympians. I think there's a certain cynicism and there's a corruption as well. Anyone who's followed the ISOC, the International Olympic Committee, they've had scandals throughout the years, bribery, corruption, that sort of thing. So I think Nicholas's point is well made that if you look at the modern Olympics, there's a lot to find fault with. Absolutely, agreed.
Well, and I'm just going to jump in there, because that was one of the points I really wanted to bring up, and I think it's part and parcel of this elevation of sport to a good unto itself, and to this the Olympics, this obsession with it. I mean, the doping. I mean, that's why one of the big reasons I'm not interested in the Olympics is I'm not interested in watching a bunch of people hopped up on steroids and growth hormone and what have you, such that they're at a level that no normal human being can achieve. And I know a lot of people would say, oh, that's exaggeration, that, look, the IOC's on top of it, they always bust a few people. I mean, again, anecdotally, from the one Olympian that I've known in my time, I mean, he is in Sydney. He placed, I don't know, like 90th or 50th or something. It was quite down there. And this was, I mean, what he told me is he said everyone that's, placed 40th and up is doping. Just most of them don't get caught. And I mean, the cynical conspiracy theorist in me would say that they even know it, and they just choose to make examples of a few people here and there to be able to say, see, we're this is a clean game. We're nailing dopers. I mean, I don't know about that. I think it's really that, as with crime, the criminals are always slightly ahead of the system, and they've got better ways to cover up their doping than the IOC has of detecting it. And they'll just catch the few that, I mean, that first of all, most of it's random testing other than the people who medal. But the people who get medals, surely they're the cream of the crop of their countries. Their countries are going to be making sure that they know how to cover up the doping. And I personally believe this gentleman that I knew, who, when he says that everyone was doping, I mean, he wasn't, and he said that's why he placed, like, whatever he placed, like 90th or something like that, because he said the people down there, those are the people who aren't doping, and even they're still supermen compared to the rest of us. I mean, this man was 6.5 feet tall, like 280 pounds of pure muscle with like a hint of fat on his body. I mean, like, he was like, you look at him, it's like the Incredible Hulk.
Well, did you find a caller who shared your views, Nicholas?
I think so. Did we want? We're just coming up on the halfway point, so we could introduce the caller into the mix.
Sure.
So I'm going to put. So we've got Maggie on the line now, and I think she has some observations and questions. But we're happy to have your contribution to the discussion. If you want to go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Going back to Stephen, you had asked Mr. Wansbutter earlier about, would you let your child, if they had a propensity to go professional, would you let them go professional? And he, had his picadillos about, saying that he would. And I very much agree with that. But the way I understand it is that it's not so much a matter of utilitarian viewpoint, but just that, all the professional players all have things like thrown at them, these immoral lifestyles that are thrown at them. So the idea that they'd be able to live, culturally live a Catholic life, not just, the prayers and going through the motions of living a Catholic life, but to be able to do that, it's just not, what are the odds?
I mean, we've had celebrities, we've had people who are actors and other people who've had to live that life. I mean, the idea that we have to concede the elite positions in society to godless people, I think, is a bad thing.
I agree. I mean, I agree with you. But would you want to be the parent in that position? You see what I'm saying? I agree, absolutely, in principle, in theory.
Well, if they're Wansbutter children, I feel fine about it. Other people, I'm not so sure.
Okay.
But Stephen, I think that's a great point that Maggie makes. I mean, well, let's look at some of the examples. I mean, look what's happened to Mel Gibson.
I knew you were going to say that.
No, I'm saying that could happen to any devout Catholicness. I thank goodness I was not good enough at sports, because I know, like, the guys who are the top tier sports guys, they have women throwing themselves at them constantly. I certainly wouldn't want to be in that near occasion.
No, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying, do we want to choose professions based on the level of temptation? Because there are all sorts of positions, jobs in life that are going to come with their own temptations that you don't anticipate. I don't think it's a good way to choose jobs in life based on the amount of temptation. It's certainly something that needs to be taken into consideration, 100%. But I don't think I would make a defining choice and say, well, there's going to be a lot of temptation in that profession, so I can't do it.
I think there may be certain professions where there is too much temptation for a Catholic to legitimately be able to take part in it.
I agree. Yeah, high-level banking, acting.
Did you say high-level banking?
Yeah, I do associate that with corruption.
Well, and that's because that would be another show topic, of course. But yeah, sure. Investment banking. Yes, but that's certainly being a drug dealer. That would be incompatible with being a Catholic. I think that would we can all agree.
Well, that's specifically engaging in criminal activity, but.
Maggie, did you have any additional thoughts on that? I think we're agreed on your point that when you're looking at a profession, be it professional sports or anything else, it's very important as a Catholic to take a look at what's the level of temptation I'm exposed to. I think we can all agree on that.
Well, I did want to say, I'm glad you brought up the acting thing, because I think of the professional sports thing as being very similar in that the amount of money and prestige that is paid to these individuals, whether they're acting or professional sports, seems entirely disproportionate to the service that they're doing for society.
Well, they're replacement gods in a way, are they not?
I wouldn't disagree. So in one sense, wouldn't you be supporting pagan religion?
We have the Super Bowl instead, or we have the NBA Finals. We don't have feast days or processions anymore. So these have taken the place in a secular way for Catholic ceremonies.
Right. Well, then, but if you were going to say that, though, then shouldn't you argue that, if you support it, then you're like supporting paganism? I mean, if you're going to take that ball and run with it.
Yes, but then I would be part of that group that constantly updates a spreadsheet that says, which corporations donated to Planned Parenthood, and now I can't buy milk. That's not a way for Catholics to live. You can't live by a spreadsheet that tracks donations. I think that we have to live our lives as best we can in the modern world, and whenever we can operate, well, not whenever we can, we always need to operate by Catholic principles, but I think it's so corrupted. Nicholas made the point at the beginning of the show, we're all moderns. There's just no way to escape it. As much as we despise it, and there are times Nicholas and I look in the mirror and despise the fact that we're moderns, I'm sure. You might as well. But we are here. And so I happen to like going to, a sporting event. But I would have never done that in the Middle Ages because they didn't have them. I would have gone to jousts, and I would have hit on pretty girls at the jousting tournaments. But I don't have that opportunity now. I would love, if you could tell me where jousting is happening, I would go there. But we don't even have anything like that.
When you visit me, Stephen, we'll go to Toronto for medieval times.
We'll go to Renaissance.
Oh, that's not the real thing. That's a pretend. That's awful.
I think you hit on something important, Maggie, by trying to link all those together. So acting, musicians, artists, that we give them a disproportionate amount of attention or money or all of those things, because I think they've become small g gods, because we don't have nobility or kings anymore. That's normally where we would have placed our awe and attention, is the queen, the king, the emperor, the pope.
That's a great point.
And that's all gone now. So so that desire in the human breast doesn't go away. It just becomes sublimated into actor worship or sports worship. But it's still there. This is a good instinct that has nowhere to go in the modern world.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently you both don't disagree as much as you thought you did.
Well, the issue sometimes with two friends who agree on a lot, we sometimes have to pick fights, but it always comes back to Catholic principles, and you can't avoid those. But I think it's just I'm a bit more willing to, let's say, eat my bacon on Friday when it comes to watching the Olympics. But we can talk about that.
Thank you for your time, Stephen. I don't want to take up too much of your radio.
No, Meg, thanks for the call.
All right, good deal.
Nicholas, did you want to add anything? I thought that was a very good call, and I think we covered some very good points. Was there anything you wanted to add on to that? Because I want to. The next thing I'll move on to is I want to go back to your doping trope, because sure. I think I wanted to do a bit more research into this before the show to find out. I don't doubt your acquaintance's allegations, your friend who was an Olympian, that there is a lot of doping going on, and that it happens in lots of sports. I made the point to you that, perhaps in sailing, nobody's doping in sailing,
Well, I don't know. I mean, if doping happens in baseball, it can happen in anything and everything.
No, and it's unfortunate when it does happen, because it gives young people who are looking up to these people the opportunity to say, well, my hero does it, therefore it's okay. We've had lots of, and especially here in the United States, whenever they've been caught, they end up lying about it, and then the testimony later reveals. So it goes further.
Right. And my point too is that, it just makes it not as enjoyable or not as interesting to me that it's not honest competition. It's all, to a large extent, a lot of it is cheating, and again, it's not normal human beings anymore. They're need to be so devoted. Look at Olympians from the 1908 Olympics versus today. They were normal human beings in 1908 who had some particular gifts. It was still in its proper place and proportional back in 1908.
I don't think we can get away with, and something that you told me about that was very surprising, that I think a lot of our listeners maybe don't know about or wouldn't have heard about. I think you were saying something about getting some of the female athletes getting themselves pregnant.
Yes, abortion.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I talked to a few people about that before the show today, and they were just horrified.
Right, yeah, that's something I read about in preparation of my anti-Olympics rant from the Winter Olympics, and I'm just pulling up the article again. It's from LifeSite News is where I got it from. This is from in relation to the Salt Lake City Olympics, so it was actually a few Olympics ago. So they were speaking to a Mona Passignano, director of research at the Texas pro-life group Life Dynamics, saying that now that drug testing is routine, pregnancy is becoming the favorite way of getting an edge on competition. One Russian athlete told a reporter that as long as goes the 1970s, gymnasts as young as 14 were ordered to sleep with their coaches to get pregnant and then abort. The procedure is so well known that it made it into textbooks.
But this is providing them with a hormonal boost?
Yes, pregnancy seems to increase muscle strength in female athletes. There's a Professor Paulev from the Department of Medical Physiology at the University of Copenhagen saying that female top athletes, just following the time when they give birth to their first child, have set several world records. Of course, this is acceptable as a natural and unintended event. However, in some countries, female athletes have become pregnant for 2 to 3 months in order to improve their performance just after the abortion.
Yeah, and that's just horrifying. It really is.
Right. I mean, it just shows to the lengths that people will go because, like, I mean, in a way, I mean, it's horrific, but, you know, for the women athletes, you know, they almost, I wouldn't say they don't know any better, but, I mean, I think there's a certain natural revulsion.
You go back to what you were saying, that there's a single-minded dedication, so I don't think that there's anything off the table when it comes to their sport. I think they've sacrificed everything, and there's no price that they're not willing to pay. And it's unfortunate. And when you told me that story, it very much saddened me because it's one of those things that happen in sport that is an unfortunate ethical choice. But it goes back, you know, if we'd had Pius XII addressing, and I'm sure we could dig up an allocution of Pius XII addressing athletes or dancers or things of that nature, where, you know, you have an opportunity to be salt and light, and, you know, that opportunity is perhaps much dimmed today. I think, you know, your and Maggie's point are well taken.
And I
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the question of this abortion doping segues a little bit into another difficulty I have with the Olympics and the way modern sport is handled is, again, you know, the destruction of distinction between the sexes, or the trying to make men and women equal and the same. That I think is another problematic aspect of it. Now, granted, it's separate men and women. They don't yet have, other than equestrian, which we can perhaps discuss later, they don't have combined events because they're at least that realistic to realize that the male athletes would, you know, they'd have all they'd destroy the women athletes. But I mean, there's a few different ways I can go on this. I guess I'm going to hammer on the clothing issue first, and just the spectacle of women performing these types of physical activities in public view, I think can be an occasion of sin for men. And I think when we were talking before, even you, Stephen, had to admit that certain events you feel uncomfortable watching, or you're not able to watch because either because it's unsavory, or just, I mean, I took it when your comment on judo is not watching that as it's kind of the revulsion that even the ancient Romans had for female gladiators. I mean, seeing women fight each other is something, I think, distasteful even to an ancient Roman pagan who was happy to watch Christians get ripped apart by lions. But the immodesty, I mean, you can't try and pretend there's anything remotely modest about any of the uniforms, and the uniforms get worse year after year. I mean, at one point they at least wore shorts and T-shirts, and now they're wearing what is barely more than a bikini from the few snapshots I've seen. I mean, I don't have a Devil's Tabernacle in my house, so I haven't had access to any of the Olympic events. So just, you know, I'll see a news article.
Well, I've been streaming everything through my netbook, but since I don't have access to television regularly either. But I think that I think your point's well taken. One of the things that, for the listeners who don't know, you know, obviously Nicholas and I speak as friends in between shows, and we're not just always talking about show topics, but some of the times we've been together, I've confessed, and I can share this just anecdotally. Bishop Williamson was visiting me a few years ago, and we were doing some work on one of his books, and he was sort of squirreled away in one of my classrooms, just doing some work, so he could have some quiet space. But during the day, it was during the summer, and, you know, some of my female students had would come and go, and he had asked me, how do you work with this, and how do you deal with this? And I told him that I had sort of become desensitized to this after years and years of teaching, and he said, that's not a good thing. And that stuck with me, and I've said that on more than one occasion. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that I can be in a position to become desensitized to it. But interestingly enough, during the week leading up to the show with Nicholas, he mentioned that, and so suddenly, you know, I paid attention to that more. You know, instead of having my desensitized eye, I paid attention to it. And those are two different issues. One, I don't want to see a woman competing in judo or weightlifting, or even, I would say, beach volleyball, where they're wearing scraps of scraps and jumping. I mean, those are things where it's just explicit, in a way. I think when I look at gymnastics and things, synchronized swimming, diving, things that are so much more artful and beautiful, that's where the difficulty comes in that there's such potential for expression and beauty here. And yes, it gets mitigated and corrupted by having immodest dressing, because they certainly could have outfits that don't reveal as much or aren't as tight fitting, and they could still perform well in their events.
Well,
but there is a conscious effort to have less and less clothing. That can't be denied. Now, this isn't true in every sport. Fencing is certainly not the case. Equestrian is certainly not the case. Sailing.
Well, although even equestrian or riding pants or skin-tight pants. And again, I go back. I always try and think of what would happen if we teleported I'm into science fiction, so I think of time travel. What would happen if we went and abducted St. Thomas More and brought him to our time and said, hey, let's go to this event. What do you think of it? Or not even a saint, just some random peasant off the street or some knight from the Middle Ages. I think someone from a Catholic society would be completely outraged and appalled to see the spectacle going on. I mean, even the men. There's such a thing as immodesty for men as well, and that's one of the soapboxes I like to get on sometimes, is how it seems to me in traditional Catholic circles frequently women are held to a standard of modesty, but men aren't held to a standard at all, and no one will bat an eyelash at them showing up to Mass in a T-shirt and jeans, whereas the women are going to be run out of town on a rail if they're not wearing a modest skirt.
You're right. I would say I know some Bishop Dolan, for example, gave a sermon just a few weeks ago where he said that it's not proper, and he said it from the pulpit, it's not proper for men to show up to Mass in anything other than a suit and tie. So there are people who mention it, and you're right that there is a level of immodesty there. But we're attacked. If I can just go one more point I want to make, because I'm just thinking of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa, when he's talking about why women shouldn't be teachers, and I could probably look it up quickly for the which section in the Summa it's under. Where he says that one of the issues that the problems with a woman being a teacher or a doctor is that they'll be up on a pinnacle in front of all these men, and that's an occasion of sin, and that's right here. I've got the quote here now, thanks to the internet. Summa Theologica, second part of the second part, question 177, answer 2A, where he's giving reasons why women ought not be teachers, and just bear with me for a moment. Hold on.
I'm going to read the quote.
You said Secunda 177?
Yes.
And then
okay, so it says...
what article? Question
2A.
2A, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's saying, okay, so speech may be employed in two ways. In one way, privately, to one or a few in familiar conversation, and in this respect, the grace of the word may be becoming to women. In another way, publicly, addressing oneself to the whole church, and this is not permitted to women, first and chiefly on account of the condition attaching to the female sex whereby a woman should be subject to man. I can skip over that because that's not the most pertinent part here. Okay, so they talk about the subjection. And secondly, lest men's minds be enticed to lust, for it is written, Sirach chapter 9, verse 11, her conversation burneth as fire. So he says that women shouldn't be teaching or speaking in public even to a degree because men's minds can be enticed to lust. Having women up on a platform in front of them. So I think
but Nicholas, surely at your child's school up there in Canada, you have female teachers.
Right, yes. But not to the high school boys. And I can attest from having gone to an all-boys high school, it was a complete and utter disaster when the Jesuits decided it was a good idea to have women teachers for the high school.
We're going to get sidetracked because it's related, but that's another show topic. I suppose we could talk about.
Right, but I can tell you, I mean, we were lusting after the younger women teachers that were our teachers in high school. I mean, anyone who denies that.
Well, we all had some
lying. I mean, I know what we were all talking about, behind the scenes when the teachers were outside of earshot, and and I was one of the good, pious, guys at the school who got accused of being a sodomite because I tried to watch my speech and not engage in too much of the salacious
You were a goody good.
So, yeah, I was a goody good, and still I can tell you that's what was going on. So, I mean, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, that's not going to be an issue. But to bring it back, I think the same holds true. I mean, okay, obviously Olympians are not up there giving public speeches, but they're clearly in the public view, wearing scarcely any clothing and engaging in, I mean, the physical activities that sometimes it can be graceful, but it's very. I mean,
you would say provocative. Is that the word you would use?
Yeah, provocative. I mean, it's not modest in any way, right? Like, there's nothing being hidden. There's no meekness. There's no gentleness. I mean, that's a whole other thing. Again, we're getting.
I mean, other than we could argue what you had made earlier, that there is a sort of androgyny to some female swimmers and female gymnasts, so that they don't necessarily have the shapeliness that might inflame such thoughts.
And again, I mean, androgyny has its whole other host of issues, especially in our society where, certain...
Well, yeah, this is an aspiration of Virginia Woolf, and that's what, that might be another show. We're always talking about other show topics, and that's the beautiful thing about Restoration Radio. Since we're interested in Catholicism, we're interested in everything. So if you have ideas for show topics, always feel free to share them with us. We've got a few minutes left still. For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Restoration Radio. My name is Stephen Heiner. I'm here today with my friend and co-host Nicholas Wansbutter. Nicholas runs a blog called Swords in Space, science fiction from a traditional Catholic perspective. And he also runs the blog Durandal, which takes a look at modern society through a medieval lens. Is that a fair characterization, Nicholas?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The exaltation of the Dark Ages. And I run, of course, True Restoration Press and the blog True Restoration. And as I mentioned in our last show, which we did on the first part, getting us ready for the Spanish Civil War, we do have costs running the show and producing it, and we are happy as Catholics, as always, to take donations. You can go to PayPal and send something to truerestoration@gmail.com, be it $1, be it more than that. We're always happy to take anything that will help contribute. As that sort of builds up, we get into a position where we can bring stronger guests on because we can compensate them for their time and not just ask them to sacrifice a lot of time. Without that, we can probably, if there's someone out there who'd like to call, we could probably take one more call. Otherwise, we're probably going to have to wrap it up. And if you have questions on Twitter, we will still continue to take a look at that. I don't think we don't have any new questions there. Nicholas, we've talked about doping, we've talked about immodesty. I think something that we need to talk about, and maybe we can end the show on this theme, is clearly the Olympics have something to do with the New World Order, in the idea of things that unite people. So let's look at the positive aspect of this. There are universal languages that are spoken that provide for people to get to know each other better. So when I'm in a foreign country, I notice that music can unify. Art can unify. I can stand next to someone. I was at the Picasso Museum, which, fascinatingly enough, Picasso in his very early ages was quite traditional in his brushwork. And I'm standing next to an early Picasso work, next to someone who speaks Japanese, speaking English, and there's a unifying force that art, music, and sport can bring. Now, clearly, nothing can unify other than our Lord, or cannot unify in a lasting, permanent way like our Lord through the social reign of Christ. That has to be admitted. There is a temptation here within the Olympics, within events like this, that we can, in the words of Neville Chamberlain, find peace in our time through things like this. And so the Olympics are always striving for peace through sport, and if I'm competing with somebody, I'm not going to go to war with them. When you look at the Olympics through the New World Order lens, am I giving you just more powder to shoot me with?
Yeah, I think you're giving me more ammunition. Yeah, I mean, it's another aspect, and again, it comes back to how I've called it, was that to me, the Olympics is one of the rituals of the modern religion of liberty, fraternity, equality, of the exaltation of man. This is an aspect of it, and it's a ritual aspect of it, and it completely ties into the New World Order in that regard. The replacement of God with man, making man into a god, and these false ideas of peace without God, peace through some sort of nebulous human being nice to each other sort of thing. I mean, so,
in the words of one of our favorite bishops, all you need is love, maybe?
Yes.
Nicholas, you brought up dress. I found a picture here. I'm going to post it on Twitter. Tennis at the turn of the century, I guess. This is from this player, Charlotte Cooper, I think is the first woman. She competed in the 1900 games. And if you look at her dress, tennis in the 1900s, if you look at her dress, I guess I wonder, is that something that you would have approved of, Nicholas? I'll post it here in a moment. But you still wouldn't have, I suppose, probably, because it's a female competing.
I think it can still be problematic. I mean, it could be certainly a step in the right direction, but I'm thinking of Dr. Horvat's audio lecture on the revolution in clothing, and
we love that. We want to make it clear, we here at Restoration Radio love Dr. Horvat, and if she would ever want to come on our show, we would love to have her.
Yes, absolutely, and I highly recommend her CD that has this audio lecture where she talks about the revolution in clothing, because she tracks the revolution in clothing from the Middle Ages, when clothing was really as it should be, as it starts being corrupted through the end of the medieval period into the Renaissance and so forth. But she gives the story, and I can't remember the name of the countess, but she gives a story of late 1800s. There was this countess who made a huge splash in the media, caused a huge sensation when she went down to the coast in her carriage and in her bathing dress, which is basically a regular Victorian dress covered from the ground up to the neck, and went into the water up to her ankles, and this caused a huge sensation. I think that now, it's the whole, could be other topics about Puritanism. Is that maybe too much in the other direction? But I think it goes a bit to this desensitization and how far we've gone today. And I just can't picture in the medieval period, in the Middle Ages, I can't picture them having their womenfolk engaging in some sort of public spectacle, some sort of public competition for the consumption of everyone else. Anything I can think of in the Middle Ages of that nature was competition between men. So, I'm not saying it's the worst thing ever, but I don't want to be coming across as too wild-eyed and tinfoil hat wearing, but I think we do need to consider how far we've come and where we've been. And again, I would think of, what would a simple medieval peasant say if I transported him ahead in time, and we were talking about this stuff.
Because well, that's someone say the food is definitely not as good.
Right, and I mean that's someone who's marinated in Catholic culture, if I can use that term. So that's why I think that. And there is one other. I know we're running low on time, but there's one other point I think worth making, because on the one message board that I wouldn't say I frequent, but I visit occasionally, Ignis Ardens, someone posted an article claiming that Pope St. Pius X helped save the Olympics, or helped promote the Olympics when they were trying to revive them in 1908. And I don't want to get into the whole debate over whether he actually said that, because when I've read some other sources, it seems that he didn't really give the Olympics his blessing. The person who went to speak with him, the guy who was trying to start the Olympics, I forget his name, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, he took what he wanted to take from it, but the comment about the Pope made some expression of opinion that healthful open-air sport was a sure means of compensating for the ever-increasing strenuous mental work required of all. And, that goes back to what we were talking about how sport may have a special place now when fewer and fewer people are engaging in physical manual labor. But the irony of that is, to my mind, the Olympics hasn't done a very good job of accomplishing getting people into doing sport themselves versus watching it, or any pro sport, because if that were true, then everyone would be doing sport and we wouldn't have this epidemic of obesity that we have.
No, you're right. The New York Times did an article a year ago about how all the cooking shows haven't resulted in more people cooking.
Right, and all the sports shows haven't resulted in more people playing sports.
You're right.
I mean, they've resulted in people being obsessed with sports, and that's part of the reason perhaps I'm so harsh against sports. I mean, I recognize fully the positive aspects that you point out, Stephen, and I have many positive memories, but it's extremely frustrating to me that I can't find a man, like, in much of my daily travels, even at the chapel, that I can talk to anything other than sports with. Because I think that's probably a good note for us to end the show on, that the Catholic principle always is all things in moderation, and that we as Catholics have a wide and enormous universe to enjoy ourselves from, because that's what God gave us. But if we do it in moderation, that shows our appreciation for Him, and I think we can agree on that, Nicholas. Absolutely.
To end the show. And I think and I'd love to have Colleen Hammond on sometime to talk about this further. How do we manage that in our children and make sure that they don't buy into this culture of sport? It's very valuable for them to participate. Just as an aside for our listeners, if you've been voting with your feet, it seems that when we have clerics on our show, we have thousands of downloads. And when it's just Nicholas and I, we get hundreds of downloads. So if we are hearing your message loud and clear, more clerics. So we are working on that, and we will have more of those shows for you. Thank you again for joining us today. You have been listening to Restoration Radio. I've been one of your hosts, Stephen Heiner from True Restoration, joined by Nicholas Wansbutter of Swords in Space, which you can find at swordsinspace.com, as well as his blog at Durandal. We will take you out with sounds like I just wrote the theme to Star Wars a few years ago, 1984 John Williams Olympic fanfare that we started the show with. But I can't listen to it and not think of Star Wars. And don't think there's not going to be a Restoration Radio about Star Wars. There will be. But we've got to establish our legitimacy as serious people first. Thanks for joining me, Nicholas, and utterly destroying me in a rhetorical debate.
This program was brought to you free of charge by the generous sponsorship of an anonymous donor in honor of Saints Thomas Aquinas and Teresa of Avila. Please keep this donor in your prayers.